Hi, this is Jeremy Lickness with Deep Sky Workflows, and my friend Glenn recently bought a new house with a dedicated space for astrophotography. He's got a permanent rig, and I stayed up on a Zoom call with him, actually Christmas Eve. We didn't have any family over, so I wasn't neglecting anyone, but I was helping Glenn get set up for his first night of imaging. And he ran the images, he got the images back, and I wanted to record a video of what I would do with those images. And I thought instead of just doing it for him with his permission, let's record a video for the website so everyone can learn from that. So the images that he captured were with a Red Cat telescope and the same camera that I have, a ZWO ASI 294 MC Pro. And the very first thing I always do is go through the exposures and find what is a good exposure and what's a bad exposure. And there's several different ways to do that. If you use PixInsight, there's a tool called Blink, and that's a great tool. I find that the FITS viewer for viewing FITS files that comes with the ASI camera is actually great for that task. And I have something pulled up now, and what I really like about their tool is it does a great job of automatically stretching it so you can see kind of what the image will look like with processing. So if we move through these images, we've got some pretty good images. We did have clouds roll in, and ideally you would have just perfectly clear skies, but you can work with clouds, and part of why I wanted to do this is so many videos focus on perfect data and they don't tell you the techniques you have to do when you don't have access to perfect data. Sometimes it can be months here in the Pacific Northwest before we get really clear skies. So there's things that you can do to help with that. You know, it's not perfect, but there is something you can do. Here we've got a meteor streak, or perhaps it was Christmas Eve, so he captured Santa's sleigh is what I'm thinking is a possibility here. And then if we go on, some of these become just so much noise, so little signal, they're not usable. These are just not good subs. And so what I would do is move them to another folder, delete them, mark them rejected, something like that. But the very first step is to figure out what's good and what's not. And we ended up with 13 3-minute exposures, so it's not a lot of data, but I think you'll be surprised what can be done. So the first step is to stack the data. That's combining the images to get the signal out of them, reduce the noise, and improve the fidelity. And normally you would take, with a ZWO camera, probably darks, flats, and lights. Your darks are getting basically background camera noise. These are electrons that excite the sensors that aren't activated by photons. They just exist, as opposed to the ones that are excited by photons, which give us the actual image. And so a dark allows you to take several captures with the lens cap on and just get that background noise to subtract it out. In fact, if I open up one of the darks, I can show you the effect it's going to have, because the ZWO cameras are well known for having a little bit of amp glow, and that is basically this area right here in the corner. That is this light coming out of the side. So we can correct for that using darks, believe it or not. And so we've taken several darks. These are going to be averaged together to get that information. So let's go ahead and add those. And all he did was he made sure that it was set to the exact same gain, which was 120, and exposure time, which was 180 seconds or 3 minutes, as the lights that he took. So these darks are 180 seconds and the same gain. So we're going to go ahead and pick those, pull those in, and then the lights are the actual data that we have to work with. Now I mentioned that normally we would take flats and dark flats, and that's a little bit more advanced. They're a little trickier to do, so I said let's just leave that off for now. And I'm going to leave it out of this video as well because you can do a lot with just darks, and I'm going to show you what I mean in a second. So I've named the rejected ones rejects, so I'm just grabbing the ones that aren't rejected. And now I'm pretty set. I can go to this calibration tab, and this is telling me what's happening. So like I have my darks, and then I can click on my lights. Notice it says dark auto. We can go ahead and set that to the darks that's linking this to these. We don't have a flat, so I'm going to uncheck that. And then you want to make sure if it's sensor data from a CCD or a CMOS camera that you have CFA images checked. Otherwise, it's going to come out monochrome, which may seem surprising from a color camera, but that's look into CFA patterns and you'll learn more about that. So we've got that checked. Another thing I'm going to do is just select and apply maximum quality. So this is the weighted batch preprocessing script in PixInsight, and it gives you some levels. We'll apply that, and what that does is, if we look at our pipeline, we've got this local normalization, which probably isn't needed so much with a small data set like this. You know, we just have around 13 objects, but a lot of times it doesn't hurt, and you can run it with and without to see the difference. And I'm just going to go ahead and run with it so that I can integrate that step in case it helps. But what we're going to do is we're going to average those dark frames together, use those to subtract that noise out of the light frames, convert the light frames from their native format to color, measure the frames that have too much noise or out of focus or aren't aligned. We're going to reject those, pick the one with strongest signal and some other parameters, you know, clearest stars, etc., as a reference frame. Going to figure out what the field of view and where that is. That's the plate solving, and I'll zoom in to make this easier to see. We'll do registration, which matches the frames up, uses the stars to align the frames. Generate a reference for what an average frame is like, and then normalize it, which is basically taking variations between the frames and averaging those out. That's a very oversimplified view. Integrating it is combining those, and then cropping it is getting rid of the edges that don't overlap based on the samples that you took. So we'll run that, and what we get in the end is a single file and a nice long file name. I'm going to open this autocrop file. And it's not too impressive when you first open it because this is the actual light that was captured. So the stars are certainly bright and visible, but we can't see any nebulosity, and that's because the signal is so weak we need to actually boost the signal for our eyes to see it. It's called stretching. And this screen transfer function, that's what it does, is it stretches. Now if we do a regular stretch, we're going to see, let me do a regular stretch, this data is biased towards green. And my first instinct used to be to level the channels out, but it turns out that instinct was wrong. This is not changing the image in any way, it's just averaging the channels out for how we see them. But if we were to try to stretch this, which means go ahead and permanently apply a change that brings it into the visible part that we can see, and I use a script called Easy Processing Suite. You can do a web search for that and find out the details for that. But it has this great soft stretch, and I'll talk about how that works. But I just want to show you, if I were to do the soft stretch, you can see this image just heavily weighted towards this background. It's almost like unviewable, but again, actually if we take, let's reset the stretch settings. I think maybe if I take this off and then I try it, no, it's the same washed out, but that's fine, because what I normally do is I've got a script that I wrote, but you can do this yourself, is the automatic background extraction is a great script. It does a good job of cleaning out some initial background and sort of normalizing some of the levels because it's not weighted so heavily towards that background noise. And where you're going to get the most bang for the buck, so to speak, is this function degree. And I don't have a method to give you the best function degree, so I just do 1 through 4 and compare those. Now the other settings that I have is I'm doing subtraction. You could do division and try the differences. I'm discarding the background model and I'm replacing the target image, so I'm not generating a new image. But that's what this looks like. So the script that I have basically just runs these 1, 2, 3, 4 so I can compare them quickly, and then stretches them. So let's go ahead and run that, and I'll show you what that looks like. Now the reason we take flats, we've got two things going on with this image. You can see there's some pretty terrible rings here in the background. So these are like smudges on the lens, and flats would normally take care of that. That is the best way to do it, but I said let's not overcomplicate things. There is another approach that I'm going to show you that can help minimize the impact of these flats if you don't have them. So we'll look at that in a second. The other thing is this green, which is really the average of those clouds that went by. And we don't really want this because we want to focus on the beautiful nebula and stars. So we're going to address that too. So I'm actually not going to use the automatic background extraction. This just gave me some information. The first thing I'm going to do is see if I can address the background before I stretch it and start manipulating things and it gets blended in, if you will, to everything that's happening. So let's stretch this to see this. So I'm going to change the name and just call it horse to give it something simple. The name that came out of the script is a little long. I'm going to drag this tab onto the surface, which creates a clone. The first thing I want to do with this clone is get rid of the stars. Now you can use StarNet, which is a process that's built into PixInsight. It's down here, StarNet. I'm going to use a paid product, so I did pay money for this product. It's not sponsored in any way, but this is a product that I think does an amazing job of star removal. So I'm not saving the stars, I'm just getting rid of them. Using a large overlap, I'm going to give you this caveat. I'm running this from a machine that was built custom for astrophotography. So this machine has a lot of power, a lot of RAM, a lot of GPU. So this will run relatively quickly. You may not have the same results. If I run this on my laptop, it takes minutes as opposed to seconds. So I'm just calling that out. But let's go ahead and run this. And what you're going to see is down in our status, down here, it's giving us a percentage as it's removing those stars. And the goal of this image that we're working with is to leave nothing interesting and only leave background. So we want to get rid of all the things we'd call features. So the way I'm going to do that is now the stars are gone. I'm going to take a pass at using what's called the clone stamp tool. That's this. And I'm going to maximize the size to 250. That's the biggest that you can have. And I'm going to control click into a non-interesting area. Actually, we'll do something kind of medium, like I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but there's a dark spot here, there's kind of a medium spot here, and then there's brighter material here. So I'm going to pick something right in the middle, and I'm just going to center it on this, control click, and then when I click there, it just clones that over. So I'm going to control click, cover, control click, cover. Notice there's some red up here, so I'm going to do the same thing there. I want to basically continue to just grab these non-interesting pieces and overlay what is interesting, which is the nebula. And notice I'm not dragging the tool around like a paintbrush. I'm going back to the same spot. And then this is where it's kind of funny because I'm going to basically take an average of averages. So I'm going to use, I have these different blur icons preset, but blur 1 is basically a multi-scale linear transform. So this looks at your images on pixel scales, with one being interesting details at the 1 by 1 pixel level, 2 by 2, 4 by 4, so forth. These X's mean I'm telling it to remove those layers. So I'm saying everything up to a scale of 64 by 64 pixels, not interested in, we'll trash it out. What that has the effect of is blurring this canvas. So let's just drag this onto here. And oh, we've got to apply our clone stamp. So the clone stamp could be reversed here. So we're going to click the checkbox to apply the clone stamp, and then I'm going to close that out because it's a dynamic control, so it sort of takes control of the target. And then I'm going to drag this multi-scale to blur it. Now we said we wanted something non-interesting, but if you let me overstretch it, you can see we still have this space here, so we're still kind of calling attention to ourselves, if you will, for the nebula. So I'm going to do one more pass with that clone stamp, and I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to take this area, and I'm just again trying to make it, and this time I'm moving around and kind of just getting neighboring pieces of real estate here, just trying to bring it closer to sort of the average of everything around it. So I'm just bringing these in. I know this is work, but you'll see what the point is here in a second when I go ahead and apply this and close this, and then I'm going to apply that blur a second time. And now it's much better blended with that. So then we're going to take this image, our original image, and there's a formula for the flat. And I don't have time to get into the math for this. I'm doing this on Christmas Day, the night before heading out on a trip, so I don't want to spend too much time on these. But I've got this flat, which is just a pixel math, and what it's doing is $T stands for the target. So it's saying anywhere on this image, take that target pixel, multiply it by this. The mean of the flat divided by the flat. What that's actually doing is that image that we just created over here, which is horse clone, I'm going to rename it to flat because that's what my script's expecting. There's an average field, and then there's specific pixels that match up to the pixels here. And the math just so works out that the impact it has looks like this. And I'm going to just scroll in a little bit. Now we do have some artifacts from it, but if you look, this is the before, this is the after. Before, after. You can see there were some variations, but it basically smoothed things out. I still have some artifacts, but they're diminished from that. So now, what is the next step? And I usually perform these things in a very consistent order, and the next thing I'm going to do is extract the background, and I'm going to use dynamic background extraction. Now when I run this, I do it a little differently than people. I see people spend a ton of time and they're trying to fit it between the stars and make sure things aren't overlapping and so on and so forth. I found that I get just as good results if I do something like this. I'm going to size it to maybe like 35, and it's just kind of based on the density of the image and the field of view and everything else. Give it maybe 12 samples per row, and I'm going to generate. And I'm going to do something blasphemous, but I'm not going to worry about the ones on stars because there's just too many, and I'm not going to shrink them. I find that the algorithm can pretty much handle stars fine. What I am going to do is move things away from nebulosity and parts of these star halos because I don't want those being confused with the background. So I know there's some nice dust around the nebula here, so I'm pulling these out. And again, I'm not being very picky about where I drop them. I'm just not dropping them on other sections of the nebula. So we know the Horsehead comes up here and has some faint, but we're going to drop a few here because this is an artifact from that flat step that we took. So it's okay if we take some of that background out, but we're going to move these away. And again, notice I'm not really caring if I dump it on stars. I'm just making sure it's clear and away from the actual nebula. So I think we're pretty good here. I'm going to move these out just a little bit so they're not confused with this main bit of nebulosity. And I'm going to just go ahead and apply this. And red is good because red means these no longer qualify for the sample, so they were actually subtracted from the image successfully. And so if we restretch, we get something like this, and it's much more uniform. I know it looks messy, but that's okay because once we stretch it and do a couple other things, it's going to turn out. Now, one thing that does bother me is this distinctive green color. So I'm going to go ahead and use this SCNR filter, which is designed specifically to handle this, and drop it on, and it's going to turn that to more uniform background. So we're off to a good start. The last thing I'm going to do before I stretch it is I'm going to apply a tool, and this is a paid tool, and there are ways to do this. If you've ever heard of deconvolution, you can go through the deconvolution process and get something similar. But this tool, again, a paid tool, but well worth it in my mind, does some things automatically. So to use this tool, the first thing I want to do is grab a piece of real estate that is kind of representative of the image. So I'm going to go here because what we have here is we have some dust, we have a star obscured, we have big stars, little stars, nebulosity. It's a pretty good sample of the image. So if we go into the preview, we can run BlurXTerminator in preview and see what's happening. So the first thing it does is it sharpens the stars. So we can go anywhere from, these are the original stars, which are in pretty good shape. So his setup did a really good job of tracking. We can tighten them almost to non-existence, which some people like that to really make them subtle and in heavy star fields. I'm going to do a little bit of a balance. I like to maybe tighten them a little bit, and so we can use this preview and go before, after. So that's a little bit, but I also like a bit of a halo because that makes it blend a little better to the background. So I've applied just a little bit of a halo in addition to the tightening. So before, after, a little bit subtle. The other thing I'm going to do is uncheck automatic PSF, and for most people this will work fine and do a great job. I like to exaggerate it maybe just a little bit more. So as I drag this bar here, if we look over here, what I'm doing is I want to sharpen this edge, and I want to stop it right when that edge starts to get sharp. So if I drag it all the way to the side, you can see really stark contrast there. Down here, it's definitely too much. But if we come down a little bit, we can get to a point where if we do the before and after, you can just start to see that edge sharpen up, just start to see some detail come in here. That's about where I want to be without overdoing it. So I can apply it to my preview, see what that looks like, and then I can go ahead and apply it overall. Now I want to come in here and show you kind of, here's the details of the Flame Nebula, here's the Horsehead. Let's apply this. And it runs pretty quickly again on my machine. Now if you look, notice how these have really sharpened up and grabbed some detail, so I love that. So I'm done with my linear processing. Some people would do a noise adjustment at this point. I prefer to stretch and actually get rid of background noise through a stretch than a noise. I may change that technique. I'm going to clarify I'm not the expert. I'm sharing things I've learned and that I know, but I'm always open to coaching and improvement. So if you have some techniques you want to share, definitely share those with us. But let's go ahead and go to this easy processing suite, soft stretch. And here's how I do my soft stretch. I basically want the background as dark as it can be in most cases, but notice how this histogram here is cut off at the top. I don't want it cut off. I want to show it. And again, this is how I consistently stretch. I don't know if this is a technique that this is how the graph was intended to be used, but I find it's a good balance because if I go too far to the left, I lose some of the detail. Whereas this is a good balance, and I'm going to have some artifacts, but those are easy enough to deal with. So let's run this. And we've got a pretty solid image right now. I'm pretty happy with how this looks, but there's more we can do. The first step I always do after I stretch is I move the stars to a separate file. The stars are way brighter than the nebula, and so they respond to different tweaks. And I want to make sure that the stars are processed differently. In fact, I may not need to process these at all. So what I'm going to do is I have these set up so I can just drag the icon onto here and make it run. But I'm clicking it open just so that I can explain to you my settings. StarNet will do this, but I'm telling it to generate the star image. So I want to have some stars to combine back. So let's do that. And it's going to run through and remove our stars. And here we have our stars in this file. And they actually came out pretty good. I think it missed one here, but look how nice and round these are. These are in really good shape. I don't think there's anything I need to do with these. Over here, we've got some modeled background and our nebula. And this is what we want to work on. This is actually in pretty good shape. We just want to bring this background a little bit darker and maybe bring out some detail on these. And there's a few ways we can deal with detail. One of those is with the multi-scale linear transform. And I'm going to go back into this preview, take it out of stretch, and show you this detail. And then I'm going to open up this multi-scale linear transform. And this is going to look terrible at first. It's all pixelated and everything else. I'm just going to reset this. So imagine you just opened this dialog. And we're going to set it to 8 layers. That's what we're interested in. And what I'll do is I'll start at probably around pixel scale 2 or 4. Let's do 4. And this bias is sort of a sharpening, but just at that level. And let's go ahead and just very gently nudge the bias to a 0.1. And you can see there was an actual change. It might have been subtle, but we did get a change there. That might be a little bit too much of a reaction. So let me go to 0.08. And I know there's some noise here too. We'll deal with the noise. Probably take it to a 6. Because I don't want a huge amount of action going on. I'm looking for something a little subtle. And the trick that I use, I don't have an explanation or science behind it, it's just something I ran into that seems to work, is I have it on each layer. Each layer doubles. I take this bias offset and have it. So it was 0.6. I'll take this one to 0.03. I'll take this one to it would be 0.15. Would be half of that. And then 0.07 for this one. And then 0.035, which will round to 0.04. And then finally 0.002. And what we've done is we've just sharpened at multiple scales. It's going to look more interesting when we apply it at a higher level. And it's just going to bring out a little more detail. The other thing I can do is if I want to add some dimensionality to this, I could selectively filter based on color. And there's a few scripts I'm going to open a script I'm not going to use just so you can see the author's name. but if you do a search for Bill Blanchin, he has a set of amazing scripts that are incredibly useful. One of them, for example, that I could use probably right off is this red mask. So this is one of his scripts, and what it does is it essentially creates a mask that isolates the red parts of the image. It's not the same thing as the red channel because white has red in it, so these stars would have red in the red channel. This is what's actually appearing as red. And this did a pretty good job right here. I always like to smooth my masks out a little bit. I've got this feather, which is a multi-layer linear transform that just takes off the first two layers. And again, think of it as a blur effect. The more layers that you take out, the more of the blur effect is applied. So this is a really light blur. And then if we took this mask, and I'm not sure if I'm going to actually successfully use it or not, just because this image has such good fidelity right now. But let's select the mask and do red mask. And it's highlighting basically red is protected. So if we invert it, I'm doing Control-Shift-I. Now the nebula is protected, everything else is wide open. I can flip that around. Now the nebula is what's there. So then we could do something like this. We could do a curves, and we could say, oh, we want to boost the saturation, which I honestly think the saturation is fine, but let's say we want to do that and get this really rich red. If you look at before, after, before, after. So that really does a boost. I'm not going to apply that. But if our mask wasn't enabled, you can see it's catching a lot more. Basically everything's getting the boost, as opposed to with the mask enabled, just a more subtle effect for that. And it can create some dimensionality. In fact, we could probably just even boost the red a little bit. And this is going to boost it in some areas but not others to create a dramatic effect. And I'm just going to leave it right there. And you could do other manipulations, like if you wanted to make the flame less orange, you could start to pull the green out. I don't recommend it, but it's something you can do. If I bring it up, then it's going to go more towards orange. So there's a lot of dials you can play with. I'm happy with these dials. Now I want to tackle the issue of the background. So there's a few ways we could tackle this. We could do something with a mask, with the curves. One thing I really like is the arc sine transformation. So if I go into processes, there's this arc sine stretch. And the way it works is we'll remove the mask. So it needs the whole image. We'll open a preview and we'll tell it to estimate the black point. And it's going to make a guess at where black is, and it's done a pretty good job here. And we can actually change that guess and make it a little darker like this, but you can also brighten the nebula. So if I wanted to say double it here, I could give it a stretch factor of 2. You can see everything's brightened up. So you kind of play with these, but I think at a 1, if I zoom in, let's, can I do, I just need to stretch this image, hold on. So if we look in, it's doing a pretty good job. I mean, we've got some things around the back, but we'll do some noise reduction for that. So let's go ahead and apply this stretch because we're just in a preview. And I think I'm actually happy. So I want to smooth this out before I add the stars back in. And there's a few ways we can do it. So the totally free built-in PixInsight way is using something, using actually the multi-scale linear transform. I created a script called Deep Denoise that lets you target luminance and chrominance, so the two different aspects of this, and this does have some color noise. I'm just going to use the defaults, and what this does is it creates a mask and then there's a multilinear transform for noise reduction. and then I can run that. So it's basically going to extract the luminance channel. You're going to see a frame pop up that's just black and white. That frame's going to be adjusted, then used as a mask so that we don't aggressively remove the noise from too much of the actual image. And it's done the luminance channel. Now it's doing the color focus denoise, which it does multiple layers on multiple channels. We've done 2 channels. We're doing the last channel, and we're done. So that certainly smoothed things out. We still have some residual noise, but it's not bad. But this is why another approach is a paid tool called NoiseXTerminator, which again, I'm going to go ahead and run that. So these are the default NoiseXTerminator. It's obviously by the same people who did StarXTerminator and BlurXTerminator, and we could basically I'm making sure I back out of the results of the last denoise. Okay, so we're where we started. So we can run that and take a look at how that works. And this will run pretty quickly on my machine once it gets started. And here it goes. And that actually did a phenomenal job. That is excellent. And then the third way is I can save this file off, and I'm going to go ahead and do that for reference. Let's just make a copy of this and then go back. And then what I would do is I would do File Save As, and I'm going to use another paid product, but again, this is a pretty well-known product and pretty well performing. I'm going to call this Horse and Flame, and I'm going to save it as a TIFF file so that the denoise software, and the software is called Topaz Denoise. Again, paid software. I use quite a bit in my workflow because of the results. So we're going to bring in denoise, and we're going to take Horse and Flame. And I actually like what NoiseXTerminator did better, because this looks a little too aggressive. Now I can adjust the dials here. Most of the time when you see one of my images that's denoised, it's with Topaz. But if I look at this, then I come back and I look at this, I think this is a good result. Now I'm not going to take this because this is way too smoothed out, but I'll show you what we do to keep it from being too waxy or artificial, or at least what I do, and I think works well. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So if I was going to use this, I would go ahead and save this image, load it in, and then use it instead of the clone that I have. But let's close without saving. And I'm going to call this denoise. And then I'm going to use pixel math to sort of blend these two together. So I've got my pixelated piece, I've got a like smoothed out piece. I want to meet somewhere in the middle, and I want to probably favor the smoothness. So pixel math is easier than I think some people give it credit for. Let's say I want to be slightly in favor of the smooth one over this one. Well, this one is $T for the target. So let's say 40%. I'm just going to do 0.4 times $T. So that's this side of the equation. So the remaining percentage, if I leave 40% of this, it's going to be 60% or 0.6 of what I just called denoise. That's the name that I gave this image. So with this simple thing, 40% of the target, 60% of denoise, we can drag this on here and we see the change applied. So the particles didn't completely go away, but we got a nice smoothing effect. And I think I might want to smooth it even a little more, so I can undo, change this to 0.3 and 0.7, and let's see what that looks like. That one I like a lot, so I'm going to stay there. Now this is going to look even better when we bring the stars back. Now remember, I didn't do any adjustments to the stars. I like them as is. And if I name this stars, I can take my macro, this star pixel math, and just drag it here and it'll restore them. Now I'm going to open it so you see what I'm doing. This is a special way of blending the stars back. Basically, I'm inverting the target and multiplying that by the stars inverted, and then inverting the result of that. What this has the effect of doing is blending the two and providing you a value that's not an average, not a mean, but actually amplifies the pixels that match and de-emphasizes the pixels that don't, so that you end up with something like this, which in my opinion is a nice natural blend. We've got some of these red artifacts in the background, but for the most part we're looking pretty good. We even have some nice textures of the dust here and so on and so forth. So I'm pretty happy with this result. We've got sharp colors, we've got smooth blend, we've got round stars. They've preserved some of that halo effect, which I think is actually lovely. We could go to what's called an arc sine stretch. I showed that earlier, and tweak this a little bit. I don't think the background needs to get any darker. That's one of my problems that I have, is sometimes I'm too aggressive. Like if you look at this, this is pretty aggressive, as opposed to maybe if we took that out and brightened the front, that's obviously too aggressive, but let's say we did 1.2. So we're not playing with the background, but we're just bringing the nebula up. And that actually might work. Let's before, after. Yeah, I like amping it up a little bit more. So let's run that. And I'm going to call that a finished image. So what I would normally do at this point is sign it with pixel math, but this is not my data, so I'm not going to sign it. This was just a look at what we could do with this data. I might crop it to make it a little more interesting scene. For example, I'm just going to show you this. We could take this, and what is interesting about this, I like the colors of these orange stars, so I wouldn't want to necessarily get rid of those. But there's some real estate down here that we really don't need. Probably some real estate up here. And we don't even have to keep this orientation. Like if we don't like the stars with the bands, we can tilt this a little bit. Bring this down. Bring this in. And we could decide if we want to keep that star. Maybe we grab a little bit more. Let's look at this field of view, see what this looks like. So we'll just apply that. And here's what we get, which I think is pretty amazing looking. I like it quite a lot. So I'm going to go ahead, and I always save a copy as final, as this XISF format, because of the data. It actually shares the history of the steps. But then for practical sharing on the web, I'm going to save this as a JPEG file. And I always do maximum quality, 100 for that. And that's a wrap. That is the process that I go through for most of my images, although it'll change, a little bit, but that's pretty much it. Let me switch back to my video, and thank you for your time and attention. As I mentioned, I am still a student at this. I'm sharing what I've learned, but I look forward to your comments and feedbacks. Visit me at deepskyworkflows.com. Check out the gallery, and clear skies to everyone.